America's best days are yet to come. That's because conservatives like you know and live the values our great country was built on. The Heritage Foundation exists to make sure your voice is heard in the D.C. swamp each day, shining the light on a bright future. The Heritage Foundation stands for your values and won't give up the fight because they know you never will. Paid for by the Heritage Foundation.
He's here. He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
On the cross, our Savior said, "Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do." That man, that young man, I forgive him.
One of the most meaningful moments in modern American history. Absolutely remarkable. Erica Kirk. How many people have it in them to do what she did? And what you saw on display yesterday was the absolute best version of humanity. The absolute best version of humanity. Because what you saw was authenticity. And by the way, authenticity top to bottom on display. Authenticity with the president, acknowledging that, you know what? I'm going to admit in my own way that Charlie Kirk, probably a bigger man than me in a lot of ways. We'll touch on that. The authenticity of Erica Kirk, walking her faith during absolute adversity. You know, we know what people are made of during times of maximum adversity. Oh my gosh. I mean, it was on display 2 days after the assassination with the amazing public appearance that she gave. What she did yesterday, unbelievable. But it speaks to the very best in humanity and the very best in the Judeo-Christian values that this country is founded upon. That, top to bottom, was what was on display yesterday. I'm Brian Mudd, in for the great one, Mark Levin. Mark will be back with you tomorrow. He is itching and ready to go, so you'll be happy about that. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be here with you, the host of The Brian Mudd Show, home station out of WJNO in West Palm Beach. You can catch me socially at Brian Mudd Radio and The Brian Mudd Show podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. I want to dive in and really walk you through a couple of things I think are going to be very important. First, aspects of the memorial, some of those next level kind of thoughts and conversations that I think are worth having. Also, about Turning Point USA. One of the things I realized in having conversations with people, with listeners, even a lot of people are like, yeah, you know what? I'm all about helping Turning Point USA. And even people that have been quite familiar with TPUSA for some time, not even having a clue about the extent of everything they do. So as you have the AOCs, the Jasmine Crockett's that are out there, you know, talking racism and really stupid things, you understand what Turning Point USA actually does. And by the way, in combating racism specifically. So I want to break down what it is that Turning Point USA actually does and what they stand for. It's far more than just Charlie Kirk having gone out and doing his Prove Me Wrong debates on college campuses. That's a big part of it, but just one sliver of it. And that continues as well. We'll talk about that because actually the next stop in the American Comeback Tour happening very shortly, the University of Minnesota. I also want to talk about what the resolutions mean. You heard about the House resolution. The Democrats have voted against it, but do you actually know what's in the resolution? Very few people actually do. And there's another angle to this. There's a Senate resolution that passed as well, recognizing Charlie Kirk Day. It's going to be October 14th, his birthday. That passed with unanimous consent. What this means is, yes, you had 58 Democrats in the House that voted against it. Yes, that is reprehensible. But actually, only about 10% of the total congressional body voted against Charlie Kirk's resolutions between the House and the Senate. And so those who stand on that side of things are with the most radical 10% of the ignorant, godless, soulless, slanderous people in this country. That's who they're only part of the 10%. And that's something I want to arm you with as you're dealing with people in your community, people that you know that want to slander Charlie Kirk and Turning Point and say stupid things. Educators who are absolutely absurd. I'm dealing with one of those locally right now. It's Pinhead in Palm Beach County. Edwin Ferguson, a school board member who called Charlie a bigot, a racist, and referred to him as Hitler, while also admitting he had never even heard of Charlie Kirk before his assassination. I want to give you the information that arms you against those types of situations as you come up against them. Again, based upon, in many cases, how representation within your state would have voted, including, by the way, with unanimous consent, all the senators in all the states. So we're going to get into that. I also want to hit at the onset here, though, the news that broke this afternoon with Jimmy Kimmel. So news is that, yes, ABC is going to bring back Jimmy Kimmel tomorrow. Okay. Now, here is the really interesting thing to me in this. Fox News, they reached out to ABC for comment after this decision was made. Here's a quote from ABC back to Fox News. They said, last Wednesday, we made the decision to suspend production on the show to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment for our country. It's a decision we made because we felt some of the comments were ill-timed and thus insensitive. We've spent the last days having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy. Did he have blackface on while you're having them? Just a question. And after those conversations, we reached a decision to return the show on Tuesday. Anything jump out to you in that statement? It's a decision we made because we felt some of the comments were ill-timed and thus insensitive. Okay, ABC, when would the right time have been to slander the situation? When would the right time have been to demonstrably lie to the viewers, to say that the left-wing activist was actually a member of MAGA? When would that appropriate moment, is it tomorrow? Would that be the appropriate time for Jimmy to have gone on and said that? So that's interesting. ABC doesn't, apparently by their own statement, find what Jimmy Kimmel said to be a problem, just the timing of it. So know that. Here's the next piece that's also really important because everybody's just kind of reporting this as, oh, Jimmy Kimmel's back tomorrow. Maybe online. They could always do that. You don't have to have an FCC license to do that online. Broadcast television, different thing. Here's the real question. It's not about whether ABC is bringing Kimmel back. It's about whether the affiliates are bringing Jimmy Kimmel back, because ABC was never taking the lead in this thing. Disney, woke as they are, did not take the lead in this thing. It happened with the affiliates. The way this went down last week, it was Nexstar that went first, then Sinclair. Those are the two most significant ABC affiliate owners in the country. So they were the ones that said, you know what? We're out on Kimmel. And then after they were out, and basically there was not going to be, anybody to broadcast to, ABC went, okay, I guess we're going to pull the plug too. So that is the next piece here. As of just before the start of this show, I had not seen anything from Nexstar or from Sinclair about whether they had any intention on broadcasting Jimmy Kimmel. So could they just go ahead and do something straight to online? Yeah, they could do that. But that is really what is worth watching in this whole Jimmy Kimmel thing. So, yeah, important to know ABC's position. Also important to watch the affiliate situation. Now, in dealing with where we started, which involves, obviously, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Wanted to talk about the very best of humanity that was on display. I'll walk you back for just a quick second about something. So it was last Wednesday that I found out I would be doing a national broadcast for the memorial. And honestly, I don't know if I felt more pressure to do a broadcast at any point in my career. And the reason was because, one, I wanted to do it justice, but also I'm not really good at that kind of thing. Like, I'm not your funeral going guy. I'm not your open casket wake kind of. I would fail miserably at being a mortician. I'm not good at that kind of thing. And we've all been to memorials that are going to be celebrations of life, right? You'll hear people, it's going to be a celebration of life. We really want to hold this person we cared about so much up. And you get there, and what is it? It is sad and terribly depressing. And that's nobody's fault, by the way. People have the best of intentions. Grieving, mourning, that's part of humanity. That's part of the human condition. So I don't mean anybody ill for saying that people intend to do well, and then you get there and it's a very sad occasion. But we've all experienced those kinds of things. So I'm sitting there thinking about, okay, trying to do this justice, but then also to kind of meet the mood, to meet the memorial where it's at, not necessarily really knowing exactly how that's going to end up. And then you start getting the lineup of people, and you start getting a little bit of a picture. Interesting mix for sure, from politicians to faith-based people to close friends of Charlie. One of the things that really clicked for me, and it was what provided a lot of clarity, was when we ended up getting the performers. And so the memorial yesterday ran for over 5 hours, the actual program itself, which, by the way, I mean, even by Saturday, when kind of had a rundown of what was expected to be as part of the program, still about half of everything that happened wasn't necessarily part of what had been scripted out in advance. There was so much that took place there yesterday. But the actual worship service itself, when you saw the biggest stars in Christian music, and that culturally was one of the greatest things to see. You take a look at like top 40 music. I mean, one of the reasons that Taylor Swift has been such a big deal in recent years is top 40 music sucks. I mean, it's like an awful, horrible format, and has been for a while, because the artists generally are not good. The music is terrible. And so Taylor Swift doesn't suck. And, oh, she's got something else. And so it always goes to number one. I mean, I'm being somewhat facetious, but that really is about half of it. The format has been terrible. And the reason is the great artists that would be top 40 artists are all doing Christian music. It's been having a moment for a while now. And by the way, it just shows you something about a lot of these record companies and the like, because there's nothing that keeps them from playing these Christian songs. It's just that we cannot have the God on our secular, godless radio station over here. So, you even when it comes to making money, they wouldn't have a better format because, oh my God, it's good. They mentioned the G word and maybe the J word on occasion too, that kind of thing, just as an aside. But that's where the best artists are. And so people began to get to see that. And that kind of set the stage for what went down yesterday. I'll pick up there next. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mudd Levin.
Folks, I have a question for you. Do you believe America's best days are still ahead? With the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence coming up in less than a year, my friends at the Heritage Foundation are taking stock of the current situation, and they need your input. They've launched a survey on America's future to gauge how Americans feel right now about where we are as a nation and where we're headed in the next 250 years. For decades, your American values have been under attack, but now, with President Trump's administration in office, we have an opportunity ability to turn the tide and usher in a new golden age for America. But the Heritage Foundation needs to hear from you. What policies do patriots like you most care about? What do you believe are the defining principles of America? What legacy do you believe we should pass on to the next generation? Please visit heritage.org/Levin today and share your feedback and help shape the future of America. That's heritage.org/LEVIN. Paid for by the Heritage Foundation.
Charlie's message, like Christ's, was an invitation. If this resonates with you and you believe American values are worth defending, welcome. If you believe in faith, family, and freedom, then you are with us.
One awesome message, right? And so that was the sound, that was the feel, even when things arrived at, kind of a political nature with Don Jr. there, who cracked some jokes at himself, and then his dad, his impersonation of his dad is the best that anybody does, bar none, which also, got a good laugh out at the president. And of course, this bringing everybody together, you ended up having Elon Musk, then made it back to the president. I'm diverging from the best version of humanity I want to talk about here, but I've said from the beginning, as soon as the breakup with Trump and Musk happened, 50-50 chance that one day Elon Musk is wearing the Trump was right about everything hat again. And I think now it might even be closer to like 60-40. I was 50-50 when the breakup happened. Now I'm more like 60-40 that he's wearing that hat. So anyway, yes, the memorial bringing Musk and Trump back together. So as we're taking a look at this service yesterday, the memorial, I mentioned what really began to set the stage for me. You had these top Christian performers. And if you're aware of Christian music, they don't need any introduction. But if you are not part of that culture, you may have never heard of the names of any of these people. You had Chris Tomlin. We found out that Chris Tomlin was going to be performing. He has been a superstar in Christian music for decades. Brandon Lake, the biggest name in Christian music over the past couple of years. Phil Wickham, he's been a superstar for many years, has the number one song out there right now. And then Carrie Job and Cody Carnes. Now, with the worship service beforehand, which, by the way, if you're inclined and you didn't catch that because very few people saw it, you'd have had to watch very specific feeds to be able to get the actual worship service because the news networks largely would just kind of dip in and out if they covered it at all. It was amazing. Absolutely amazing. Go back and it was almost 2 hours, like an hour and a half of the worship service. Unbelievable. You will be inspired. Again, if you're inclined. But when I found out that they were going to be performing together, all of those artists at one time, I took a look at my wife, and this is about midday Saturday. And I said, I get it now. They're going to sing The Blessing. And The Blessing is a song that was written by Carrie Job and Cody Carnes. Several years old now. Just a beautiful, amazing song. And I began to get the feel for what this was really going to be, which was a true celebration of life. That it would be inspirational, that it would be the best that humanity has to offer, which it delivered on. And that's when I began to understand what I needed to do for the broadcast yesterday. Pick up there next. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
We're coming upon the 250th birthday of the United States, and it has me thinking, what will America look like 250 years from now? My friends at the Heritage Foundation want to know what you think. What policies should America prioritize? What principles should carry us into the decades ahead? As America enters a new golden age, Heritage recognizes that this is the time to take stock and to be intentional about how we shape the future of America. And they can't do it without your input. So please go to heritage.org/LEVIN and let them know what you think is important. Without patriots like you stepping up and speaking up for what you believe in, America as we know it can't survive for another 250 years. Please go to heritage.org/Levin, heritage.org/LEVIN. Take the survey on America's future. This survey takes less than 10 minutes to complete, but it is critical for making sure that the America we pass on to future generations is an America we're proud of. Go to heritage.org/Levin today. That's heritage.org/LEVIN. Paid for by the Heritage Foundation.
Mark Levin, the thunder on the right. Call in now, 877-381-3811.
And this May the 9th, Erica doesn't know this yet, we are going to give Charlie and Erica the greatest respect a college can give, an honorary degree.
It's Larry Arnn, the president of Hillsdale College, and Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin. Mark is back tomorrow. Required reading in the meantime. If you haven't purchased your copy of On Power, you're behind the curve. And so you need to get on the ball and get your copy of On Power. Begin getting your reading in and get ready for Mark to be back with you tomorrow. Talking about the best of humanity being on display all throughout the memorial yesterday. Culturally, we saw the best that humanity has to offer with the artists that performed. And then that set the stage for the messages we heard and the authenticity that was behind them. I mentioned that I was feeling a lot of pressure, a lot of weight. I was kind of concerned not only to do justice for the broadcast I was called on to do yesterday, but then also the mood and to try to meet the memorial where it was at. And so I felt a lot of weight, pressure going into this thing about achieving those things. And then midday, Saturday, when I kind of put the pieces of the tone and the way it was going to be set, the pressure came off and I actually began looking forward to it. And if you caught it yesterday, you understand everything I'm saying. If you didn't, you should. It's absolutely worth going back and taking it in, because what you actually saw was everything that Charlie was all about. From people you probably are not familiar with that were his friends, to key people at Turning Point USA, the leaders in faith to him, including his pastor, and then key political figures. And all of it was appropriate. And all of it was what not only Charlie meant to them, meant to the country, but also a peek into the people themselves. And I mentioned Erica, I believe, had one of the most important and significant moments in modern American history. It's this. For those of us who call ourselves faithful, what you saw with her is everything the rest of us kind of wish we would be. Most of us are pretty convenient in our faith, right? Where if we're halfway decent about it, we know the things we should be doing and things we probably shouldn't. We do the things we are called on to do, typically when it's convenient for us. It is clear that Erica, Kirk, and that Charlie were not those people. One of the most remarkable things about Erica's address at the memorial yesterday, aside from doing something that how many of us could actually do, forgiving her husband's assassin just 11 days after it happened, which is something that her faith calls on her to do, something that she explained. It's the ultimate in walking in one's faith. It's unbelievable. But it also is what's important in understanding Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA. One of the little annoyances to me since the assassination happened is how he has been defined to people as a conservative activist. Well, yeah, Charlie was that, right? It's accurate. I mean, it's not an appropriate statement to call him a conservative, but that isn't the reason that Charlie Kirk became Charlie Kirk. That's also not the reason that he is dead today. Charlie Kirk became who he was. Turning Point USA became what it is for one reason above all others: faith. Charlie was the leading faith-based conservative activist out there. That's what made Charlie different. And that's what makes Turning Point USA different. And that's also why he is not with us today. You take a look at how many influential conservative activists are out there. And we've only had 4 non-office holders in American history that have been influential political activists that have been assassinated. The last preceding Charlie was Martin Luther King Jr. in April of 1968. What's different was Charlie's faith. And that is what was fully on display yesterday. Who he was, what he's about, what Turning Point USA is. You know, one of the things that really hit home, I know it did with my wife, and it ended up with me too. It's one of the many lessons that can come for all of us out of what took place yesterday. Erica, and the passion in her speech, at one point talked about how great their marriage was and how much Charlie loved her and how much she loved him. And I got a text from my wife saying that she hoped I felt the same way about her. It made me sad because I do. And I told her I do. But I told her that I'm not as good of a man as Charlie was. And that's the truth. You see how great the man was in moments like that, where his wife can inspire other people like that to be better people. Her speech yesterday helped inspire me to want to be a better husband to my wife. Because I do love her as much as what she was describing Erica was about Charlie. But my wife didn't know it because I'm not as good of a man. President Trump talking about Charlie, about how he would engage in discourse and not hold grudges and wanted to work things out. And Trump admitting, I really kind of hate my enemies. And Charlie wouldn't like that. That's Trump's way of acknowledging, you know what? Charlie was the bigger man than me. He was capable of doing things that I am not, at this point in my life, still able to do. I hate my enemies. Probably shouldn't do that. Charlie didn't do that. Charlie doesn't want me to do that, but I do. That wasn't their intent yesterday, but it actually, for me, was a massive takeaway. Because from just about everybody, just being authentic and being honest, you saw how truly great the man really was. And then you get the sense about the underlying importance of his organization. And so that is what I want to break down for you as well. So I mentioned at the onset, I've learned from so many people, they really didn't know the extent of Turning Point USA. Even most people, they're like, yeah, you know what? I'm a fan of Charlie Kirk, and I've been following him for years, and that kind of thing. Did you know that Turning Point USA operates in 4 chapters, 4 movements? And these are important in understanding, not only for the organization, but also as you come across people that are bigoted, that are ignorant, what have you, combinations thereof, that would argue against this. So the 4 chapters or movements of Turning Point USA are Blexit, faith, education, and alumni. And the first one, as you have the Jasmine Crockett's that are out there, the AOCs and company, all these, idiots out there that want to talk about race. Jasmine's really upset because there are only 2 Caucasians that voted against the House resolution for Charlie Kirk. How dare all those other whitey white people? It's a race thing. Here's the reason, beyond Turning Point USA being a conservative organization, they were so upset about it. It's how effective they actually were in the black community. Blexit is the largest minority grassroots movement in the country. And they say they shift culture through live events, grassroots organizing, inspiring educational initiatives. And the Blexit stands for Black Exit from the Victimhood Mentality. Boy, what greater threat is there to the Democrat plantation than that? Right? Who else is out there doing that in the conservative community? What other organization is out there actively working day in and day out for the black exit from victimhood mentality? Turning Point USA is. That's why it's such a threat to people like Jasmine Crockett. It undermines everything that they try to keep in place. The victimhood mentality, the government program mentality, the broken family mentality. And they do this, by the way, not just for youth, because obviously that is central to Turning Point USA, but they offer the Blexit programs for adults as well. It focuses on civics, American history, and the influence of progressive ideology on the family. Then you get to faith. Turning Point USA Faith, they say they exist to unite the church around primary doctrine and to eliminate wokeism from the American pulpit. That was something else that Charlie was extremely passionate about. Part of the problem is you have people that are like, hey, you know what? I am a believer and I'm going to church, and then they're being led astray because you got these, woke progressives in there that don't go along with the religion at all. It's make everything up as they go. That is part of what Turning Point USA does. Education. So Turning Point Education, dedicated to reclaiming the education of children, reviving virtuous education focused on truth, goodness, and beauty, and restoring God as the foundation of education. Well, holy cow, how long have we talked about that? There are so many times we've had this conversation on the show, so many times that Mark has pointed this out in profound ways. But you can go back to the Supreme Court decision in 1962 that was misinterpreted, that ended up leading to an overreach by government agencies, eventually extending to the Department of Education, that really implemented the removal of God in any capacity from schools with its start in 1981. And you can draw a straight line between educational outcomes going down the drain in the United States, where we were second in education outcomes in 1981 at the onset of the Department of Education, where we're somewhere around 30th today. But also, you can draw a straight line to a dramatic increase in mental health issues. You can take a look at an increase in violence that went along with those mental health issues. I always point out that Columbine, that was the first generation raised under the Department of Education. Columbine 99, right? They were seniors. First full generation under the Department of Education. That was the onset of school shootings. And it's only gotten worse since, right? What changed? You could go into a JCPenney catalog as recently as 1984 and order a fully automatic weapon. Wasn't the weapons. We didn't used to have the mental health issues we have. What happened? Right? So the removal of God, any semblance of it in education. So what does Turning Point USA do? Work on restoring it. You see why there's such a threat. And then alumni, the fourth piece of Turning Point. Turning Point's Alumni Association, they say, exists to engage and activate the growing network of postgraduate activists through exclusive benefits, strategic program structure, increased communications. Turning Point USA Alumni Association aims to build pride, participation, and philanthropic commitment to Turning Point USA. So, yeah, I mean, Turning Point USA absolutely led by Charlie Kirk's fearless Prove Me Wrong events on college campuses. The organization has been so much more in so many different ways. And that's why Charlie was such a threat. That's why Turning Point USA is such a threat. That's why it's important that you know the truth about who they are and what they do. And on that note, just getting started. Going to give you a lot more. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
Folks, I have a question for you. Do you believe America's best days are still ahead? With the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence coming up in less than a year, my friends at the Heritage Foundation are taking stock of the current situation, and they need your input. They've launched a survey on America's future to gauge how Americans feel right now about where we are as a nation and where we're headed in the next 250 years. You know, for decades, your American values have been under attack, but now, with President Trump's administration in office, we have an opportunity to turn the tide and usher in a new golden age for America. But the Heritage Foundation needs to hear from you. What policies do patriots like you most care about? What do you believe are the defining principles of America? What legacy do you believe we should pass on to the next generation? Please visit heritage.org/Levin today and share your feedback and help shape the future of America. That's heritage.org/LEVIN. Paid for by the Heritage Foundation.
Charlie has heard the words echoing now in heaven. Well done, good and faithful servant. Charlie will take it from here. God bless.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth yesterday, and again, something for everybody there. It really was a remarkable display, the very best of humanity. And even for a lot of these people that you're familiar with, the very best of them, because you got to learn so much about the people, true character. When I always talk about during times of adversity, that's when you see what people are really made of. And you got to see that on display yesterday. It was a remarkable thing. It was truly an honor to be able to cover it, but also to be able to take it all in and learn from it. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin. And John wants to weigh in here talking about education, taking God out of schools, how Turning Point works every day to try to get God back into schools. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Brian. Hey, so you're absolutely right. I think that was the first piece, though, of the dismantling of the United States education system. Taking God out of school was the first piece of that. And you talked about Columbine was the first generation of kids who kind of experienced that. But I'll tell you something else that Columbine was the first generation of. They were the first generation of kids that grew up in everybody gets an award for something, or everybody should get a certificate, or that whole thing started in the early 90s. That's really hurting us. I would also say they're the first generation where standardized testing, from the Department of Education really became, hey, it's all about those test scores, and it changed the way educators teach, if you even want to call it that anymore. And it's set the stage for, talking about mental illness. I mean, these kids who are the standardized testing stuff is absolutely ridiculous what these kids have to go through today for all these. And I'm not against standards. I totally get it, but it changed the way education is being taught. It's at the expense of athletics, and it's at the expense of physical activity and kids playing outside, and all that stuff went away, all in the name of standardized testing and making sure every kid got an award. And
John,
God absolutely plays a role in that.
Well said. Great call. On point. And by the way, I can relate to a lot of that. I just very, very close to that generation. I graduated in high school in 97, and about the whole trophy thing, you're right. I remember all of the trophies from the losing teams, they didn't survive the first move with me. I'm like, why do I have this thing? Be right back. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
This segment of the podcast is exclusively sponsored by Pure Talk. Pure Talk offers great coverage and can save your family money on your wireless bill every single month. Go to puretalk.com to find the plan that's right for you. Thank you again for listening, and thank you so much for this sponsorship, Pure Talk.
He's here. He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
Charlie suffered a terrible fate, my friends. We all know it. We all saw it. But think, it is not the worst fate. It is better to face a gunman than to live your life afraid to speak the truth.
That is your Vice President, J.D. Vance, yesterday. And for Turning Point USA, it's just the beginning. I was thinking about this over the weekend, and there are certain figures, not many, but some, that are actually greater after death than in life. And there is little doubt at this point that Charlie Kirk, as great as he was in life, will be that way after death. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin, and there is so much that I know is going on in the news cycle. We talked about Kimmel. Tylenol is bad, by the way. Trump does not like Tylenol. He also was talking about acetaminophen generally, because that's really the drug in question, not so much the brand Tylenol, but acetaminophen. And so the Trump recommendation, now the recommendation against pregnant women taking acetaminophen, and some of the autism results the administration is showing. By the way, have an opportunity. I might break some of that down later in the show. There are a lot of things that are going on, and the media wants you to move on. One of the things that the news media wants is for you to move on. Go, okay, the memorial was yesterday. We can bring Kimmel back tomorrow. We can just get on with the way that things were. And I'm not in that place. And I'm not going to go to that place. And I don't think you should either. I know Turning Point USA isn't. So let me talk about this for a minute. Thinking about some of the historical figures that were greater after death. Edgar Allan Poe. I'm a big Poe fan. Vincent van Gogh. Not as much in terms of just like personal art preferences, but nevertheless. Nikola Tesla. These are all examples of people who became far more successful after death than they were while they were alive. You know, for example, Poe. I mean, yeah, people knew him as a writer, a poet, critic, but he always struggled financially. The reviews on his work at the time, mixed at best, a lot of times not very good. And even, you know, works like The Raven, The Telltale Heart, The Fall of the House of Usher, never became like, you know, best-selling kind of material in its day, or like, you know, the stuff that the literary world thought was amazing. So he died in poverty at 40. Case of Van Gogh. That was even more remarkable than Poe's. Trivia time. How many pieces of art did Van Gogh sell while he was alive? It's one of the great trivia questions that exist in terms of like cultural significance. Van Gogh. Stuff sells for millions, the original works now. He sold one painting during his lifetime. One. I mean, that was it. And so he struggled with poverty. He was always poor. He had mental health issues. Tesla? I mean, was he big in his day? I mean, yeah. But only to a point, because all of his groundbreaking innovations deemed just too risky to be pursued at the time. And so he pretty much instantly became overshadowed by Thomas Edison. And Tesla also died a poor man in 1943 because he poured anything he had into his projects just to try to keep going. He was just ahead of his time. And now, of course, you have the world's most valuable automotive company founded by the greatest innovator of our time that's named after him. Here's another name that kind of fits the mix. Jesus Christ. By the way, he's a man that obviously well known in his time. In fact, fun fact, he's the one name that comes up as a historically significant figure in every single major world religion, 16 in total. Now, Charlie Kirk, no Jesus Christ. However, he did end up like all but one of his disciples. Now, I mentioned that what really separated Charlie and Turning Point was his faith. You got all kinds of notable conservative activists that have been out there. He's the only one who was assassinated. What made him different? That tends to happen to people that really walk their faith at that level. And so, yeah, martyred for his faith. And he's almost certainly set to become even more effective now than he was when he was alive. Consider this. According to YouGov, 46% of Americans had no clue who Charlie Kirk was before his assassination. Only 24% who said they were very familiar with Charlie. As successful as Turning Point was, as Charlie was, 46% no clue, 24% very familiar. I don't know where exactly that is now, but I mean, after the past week and a half, gotta imagine it's a lot higher than that. I mean, of course, you had the House resolution honoring his work, Senate resolution. That ended up passing with unanimous consent. I'm going to break that down for you as well, because I think it's important for you to have context and really know what's there. Yeah, the record-setting memorial, over 90,000 in attendance. By the way, as of this morning, 65 million people had watched or listened to at least some of the memorial, either live or online. Already by this morning, 65 million. I'm sure the number is much higher now as people continue to just check out stuff online. So it's pretty clear that his name is already bigger in death. But importantly, Turning Point USA is looking to be a much bigger organization now, too. So in addition to the greater than 62,000 new chapter requests, already an estimated $15 million has been raised through donor pledges. Those are just the ones that have been made publicly. $15 million up front publicly. Merchandise sales, event ticket sales, those are huge right now. We know we just don't have all the numbers on that. One of the estimates out there by one of the longtime and top donors to Turning Point thinks that they're going to get $100 million in this cycle right now. $100 million. Or in other words, the fundraising following Charlie's death appears like it could be on track to clear what his entire organization had done in a year most recently. And this is hugely important because you have the rapid demand for the new chapters and the new reach, and they should be able to have the resources to be able to scale accordingly. And that is really important here. So let me put this in perspective. If even 10% of the requests for new chapters are legit, if even 10% of those who are saying, yeah, let's establish a new chapter for Turning Point, turn out to be successful, it would effectively triple the reach of Turning Point USA. To repeat that again, if only 10% of the demand for Turning Point chapters turns out to be legit, turns out to stick, it would triple Turning Point USA. That gives you a view of the possible in real time. And you look at how incredibly effective and successful the organization had already been. So the potential reach for what's about to be here in the next weeks, months for Turning Point USA would likely have taken numerous years to achieve previously. Talking about Charlie already having that kind of greater impact in death. And speaking of reach, the comeback continues. So yeah, Charlie's last stop on Earth was actually the first of the scheduled American comeback tour stops. And Erica Kirk was insistent, of course, that the comeback tour was going to continue. She mentioned that, that first address just 2 days after the assassination. And so that first one scheduled right now right now at the University of Minnesota with Michael Knowles. So Turning Point's American Comeback Tour is continuing right now before a sold-out crowd. On Wednesday, it's on to Virginia Tech, where Megyn Kelly and Governor Glenn Youngkin are going to be taking the stage for Turning Point USA. You're going to have future events on the Comeback Tour that are going to feature Erica Kirk, Glenn Beck, Vivek Ramaswamy, among many others. So the bottom line is that the American comeback is continuing to, with many of the biggest voices on the right that are holding the line. So it's encouraging to see what continues to be an unprecedented level of support for Turning Point USA. And it's going to be exciting to see how this translates across the country. Again, the important thing here is not just to let this momentum go away, which is what people want to happen. It's what your news media wants to happen. Short attention spans, move on. I had people tell me it was going to be over in 3 days after his assassination originally, and I told them no way, that this is different. But it'll be different because of these things that I'm telling you. Turning Point will make the best use of these resources and this attention, but also for all of us to do our part too. And that could be as simple as just simply being informed and being able to have these kinds of conversations with people. When you take a look at the grassroots outpouring of support, everything we've seen, especially demographically, I'm actually the most optimistic that I've been since I first spoke of the opportunity for generational change in this country back in October 2021. Because generational political and cultural change is here. You take a look at how successful President Trump was in gaining the most youth vote that any Republican has since Reagan in 1984. Yeah, a lot of that was because Dementia Joe is Dementia Joe, ruined the economy and everything else. And then, I mean, were they seriously taking a look at Kamala Harris and thinking that was a better plan? So yeah, I mean, some of it was just the suck factor on the left. But the rest of it was actually painting the vision for what could be. And so Turning Point USA continues to do that. The American Comeback Tour that's underway. Generational political and cultural change is here, and it is Turning Point USA that is leading the way. So the comeback is continuing right now, and it's an exciting thing to see. Now, the next piece that I think is important is actually knowing what the heck happens to be in these resolutions. Because all you ever hear is that, oh yeah, you know, Democrats, some of them voted against in the House, and most people didn't even seem to know that there was something that happened in the Senate. I think you should actually know what's in those resolutions. That's information that can be key when you're dealing with some lefties. I got that next. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mudd Levin.
When was the last time you bragged about your wireless company? Like, did you know my wireless company gave away 1,000 American flags to deserving vets and forgave $10 million in veteran debt? Did you know my wireless company raised almost $500,000 to help prevent veteran suicide? In other words, when your wireless company is Pure Talk, there's a whole lot to brag about. You can even brag about the coverage you get with Pure Talk, a 5G network that is insanely fast, dependable, and secure. And you can definitely brag about how much money you save with Pure Talk. Unlimited talk, text, plenty of data. Just $25 a month, saving the average family over $1,000 a year. It's time to switch to my favorite wireless company, Pure Talk. Go to puretalk.com/Levin and save an additional 50% off your first month. Again, puretalk.com/LEVIN. Make the switch today. Pure Talk, wireless worth bragging about.
And so on that terrible day, September 10th, 2025, our greatest evangelist for American liberty became immortal. He's a martyr now for American freedom. I know I speak for everyone here today when I say that none of us will ever forget Charlie Kirk, and neither now will history.
Yeah, sure enough, and I think as hopefully I did a decent job of illustrating, he already is on track to achieve more in death than he did while he was alive, with the incredible growth of his organization, with the outpouring of support for Turning Point USA, and the incredible leader that Erica Kirk is. Now, I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday around the memorial, and a significant person, and said, I have no idea if Erica has any interest in politics. You know how Charlie, the conversation, even by President Trump, was like, he's presidential material. You know, if he wants to do that one day, he's got what it takes. Person I was talking to was like, I have no idea if Erica is interested in politics, but I would vote for her for president. I mean, so stand by on that whole aspect of things, too, if she ends up being inclined. Who knows? I mean, she'll be the first woman who is president. One of the things I think is really important, there's been so much focus, so much attention on the House resolution, where you did have dozens of Democrats that voted against it, where you do have Jasmine Crockett and AOC going crazy and just, calling Charlie racist, bigot, homophobe, name it. I mean, everything in the book, all the nonsense that's out there. And a lot of the left-wing news networks that are giving them space to spout their nonsense and not calling them out on it. But the first thing that I think is important in context is that for the Democrats, because you did have just over 36, I think it was 38 Democrats that voted present. For the Democrats that did actually take a position, nearly 2-1, they did vote in favor. So first of all, it wasn't even the majority Democrat position to vote against the House resolution. Overwhelmingly, the People's House voted for this. You never hear what's actually in the resolution, just that it's a thing. It says, whereas Charlie James Kirk, born October 14, 1993, was a courageous American patriot whose life was tragically and unjustly cut short in an act of political violence on September 10, 2025, at Utah Valley University. Whereas Charlie Kirk was a devoted Christian who boldly lived out his faith with conviction, courage, and compassion. Whereas Charlie Kirk was a devoted husband to his beloved wife, Erica Kirk, and a loving father to their daughter and son, exemplifying the virtues of faith, fidelity, and fatherhood. Whereas Charlie Kirk was a fierce defender of the American founding and its timeless principles of life, liberty, limited government, and individual responsibility. Whereas Charlie Kirk, at 18 years old, founded Turning Point USA in 2012, a student movement with the mission to identify, educate, train, and organize students to promote the principles of fiscal responsibility, free markets, and limited government. Whereas Charlie Kirk became one of the most prominent voices in America, engaging in respectful civil discourse across college campuses, media platforms, and national forums, always seeking to elevate truth, fostering understanding, and strengthen the republic. I'm going to pick up here, but you already get a vibe for where this is going. A majority of Democrats who took a position recognizing that Charlie Kirk engaged in respectful civil discourse. This is important. Continue. Be right back. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
When was the last time you bragged about your wireless company? Like, did you know my wireless company gave away 1,000 American flags to deserving vets and forgave $10 million in veteran debt? Did you know my wireless company raised almost $500,000 to help prevent veteran suicide? In other words, when your wireless company is Pure Talk, there's a whole lot to brag about. You can even brag about the coverage you get with Pure Talk, a 5G network that is insanely fast, dependable, and secure. And you can definitely brag about how much money you save with Pure Talk. Unlimited talk, text, plenty of data. Just $25 a month, saving the average family over $1,000 a year. It's time to switch to my favorite wireless company, Pure Talk. Go to puretalk.com/Levin and save an additional 50% off your first month. Again, puretalk.com/LEVIN. Make the switch today. Pure Talk, wireless worth bragging about.
This is the home of America's founding. Call in now, 877-381-3811.
Murder was not just an attack on one man or one movement. It was an attack on our entire nation. That was a horrible attack on the United States of America. It was an assault on our most sacred liberties and God-given rights. The gun was pointed at him, but the bullet was aimed at all of us. That bullet was aimed at every one of us.
And it's why we can't let Charlie just die. It's certainly not what Turning Point USA is going to do. It's certainly not what Erica is doing. In fact, Turning Point USA right now, the second stop on the American Comeback Tour, the one that Charlie would be doing himself, if he were still with us today, it's happening. It's happening right now at the University of Minnesota. Yeah, Michael Knowles, who has taken Charlie's seat at that event. The American Comeback Tour will continue. And by the way, the great one, Mark Levin, will be back with you tomorrow. I know you'll be excited about that. I know he's going to be excited to be back. And in advance, if you don't have your copy of On Power, make this the opportunity to go ahead and get it. Get brushed up on your reading so you are informed by the time that the great one gets back. Get your start on Power over the next day. One of the things I was doing, I think it's really important. There's this big debate about the House resolution. And I think there's also just a general lack of understanding about what actually was acknowledged in this resolution. And it provides a lot of information that is instructive when it comes to debates you might have with people that don't really understand Charlie, that don't know Turning Point USA, but also politically in this country. Because yes, you had way too many Democrats in the House that voted against this. Yes, you've got the Jasmine Crockett's and AOC's, but you actually had a majority of Democrats that took a position affirming what the resolution says, that Charlie Kirk engaged in respectful civil discourse across college campuses, media platforms, and national forums, always seeking to elevate the truth, foster understanding, and strengthen the republic. Again, this is the resolution. Whereas Charlie Kirk personified the values of the First Amendment, exercising his God-given right to speak freely, challenge prevailing narratives, and did so with honor, courage, and respect for his fellow Americans. Whereas Charlie Kirk's commitment to civil discussion and debate stood as a model for young Americans across the political spectrum. And he worked tirelessly to promote unity. Again, very important here. Not only did overwhelmingly the House of Representatives pass something that said he worked tirelessly to promote unity without compromising on conviction, including a majority of the Democrats that took a position. This is the conversation that's not being had, but needs to be understood. Whereas the assassination of Charlie Kirk was not only a heinous act of violence, but a sobering reminder of the growing threat posed by political extremism and hatred in our country. Whereas such acts of politically motivated violence are against the principles of a free republic, in which differences of opinion are to be debated, not silenced, with civility, reason, and mutual respect. Whereas the rise in targeted violence against individuals for their political beliefs undermines the very fabric of our constitutional democracy and chills the free exchange of ideas essential to a healthy civic society. Whereas leaders at every level, government, education, media, and beyond, must stand united in unequivocal condemnation of political violence, regardless of their ideology. Whereas the tragic loss of Charlie Kirk must not be allowed to deepen the divides in our nation, but instead serve as a turning point to recommit ourselves to better angels and to the timeless American principles of liberty governed by truth and the virtues of peaceful dialogue. And whereas Charlie Kirk would not have us respond to his death with despair, but rather with renewed purpose to speak truth with courage, to stand firm in faith, to seek unity while standing firm in principle, and to serve as living reminders of the values he championed: faith, family, and freedom. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the House of Representatives condemns in the strongest possible terms the assassination of Charlie James Kirk in all forms of political violence, commends and honors the dedicated law enforcement and emergency personnel for their tireless efforts in finding the suspect responsible for the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and urges the administration of swift justice to the suspect, extends its deepest condolences and sympathies to Charlie Kirk's family, including his wife Erica and their 2 young children, and prays for comfort, peace, and healing in this time of unspeakable loss, honors the life, leadership, and legacy of Charlie Kirk, whose steadfast dedication to the Constitution, civil discourse, and biblical truth inspired a generation to cherish and defend the blessings of liberty, and calls upon Americans, regardless of race, party affiliation, or creed, to reject political violence, recommit to respectful debate, uphold American values, and respect one another as fellow Americans. That is the resolution. The overwhelming majority of the People's House, including nearly 2-1 Democrats who took a position. So when you have people that will say these ridiculous things, have the House resolution handy. And in many cases, even if they're in a Democrat district, guess what? You're going to find that their representative signed off on that message too. Really important for people to be informed, and really important to lead with truth going forward, as Charlie would do. Let's go to Greg. Greg in New Jersey. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for taking my call. I just want to say I was actually around in the 60s and 70s when they took God out of the classroom. And everybody said, oh, this is a slippery slope. And, we just thought that they were just being, weird. They were old and they didn't know what they were talking about. But they did know what they were talking about. There was a time in this country when if you came here and you didn't act the right way, we got rid of you. Like, there were so many people that just don't belong here. They don't like it here. They hate us. They hate the country. They come here and they tell us that they want to change this into what they came from. Like, finally, maybe we're at a point where we can tell these people, you know what, you're wrong. All these alphabet people, we can tell them to go screw off, too, because they're insane what they're doing to our kids. Our country's being destroyed by people that I don't know what their motivation is. I mean, it's almost demonic,
So Greg, I hear you, and I get the frustration as well. And you're right. In fact, I'm so far behind in terms of what I want to cover in today's show. I don't want to promise something I'm not going to get to, but I had planned to dive into the evil of gender ideology. This is something that Caroline Levitt addressed in the presser that she held today, the first since the assassination of Charlie Kirk. There absolutely is something to the evil of gender ideology. You're right. I call them the homosexual alphabet people. There very much is an agenda that is not healthy, that has been undermining so much of our society. But what I think is important in this particular moment is to realize that maybe we're winning. Maybe the reason this happened is because we're winning. If you think back, not just politically, in terms of Democrats having control of everything just a few years ago, but then you take a look at last year's election cycle and what changed. It wasn't just that Trump won again. It wasn't just that he won the popular vote too. And it wasn't that Republicans took back control of Congress. It was how it happened. You had the largest shift in the youth vote that we've had in this country since 1984, which happened to be the last time that you had a generation of young conservatives that came about. You have seen, and I mentioned this last Thursday when I was guest hosting, attendance at churches after Charlie Kirk's assassination that is on par with what we saw after 9/11. In many churches, we heard coming out of yesterday again, and it's anecdotal, I haven't seen new stats, record attendance. And who was leading the charge? Younger adults. And when I've broken it down even further, if you take a look at in real time, or at least as far as we had things informationally, if you take a look at the most conservative generation, which has been Gen X most recently, millennials are now trending more conservatively than Gen Xers were at the same age. Gen Z trending more conservatively, not only than Gen X, but than millennials were. And so you're beginning to see what really might have been the turning point in our society. You take a look at all the gender ideology garbage. Boy, June was a lot less queer this year, wasn't it? A lot less queer. You have a lot of people that have started to reject that. I mean, yeah, you have the blue states and the whack jobs and everything else where it's a constant battle. But even they have been put on the defensive in those situations. So the point is that we might have already had the turning point, so to speak. Charlie's a huge part of that. And now the important thing is to continue that momentum. Sometimes it's hard to tell when you're winning, but I actually think we're in the process of doing that, and the generational political change is here. Let's go to Patrick. He's patiently been waiting online. Patrick in Colorado, welcome to the show.
How you doing, buddy?
Hey, all good.
Thanks for taking my call. All right.
You bet.
Real quick here. I think that, think about this. Donald Trump and Charlie went through the same thing. They were put into a fishbowl and surrounded by people they don't know, and many buildings that snipers would have a great shot at them. What I don't understand is why, and I'm not saying that they deserve what happened to them, because they didn't, but why would security put them in that situation where some high school punk almost killed President Trump and some other guy that's not even, neither one of them were special forces, neither one of them were trained, but one of them got a good shot, the other one got a headshot kill.
Yeah, Patrick, I appreciate it. And a couple of things about this. So they're similar, sure, but they're very different in that when you have the Secret Service involved, there can be no excuse. There is no explanation. There is no excuse whatsoever for what took place with the assassination attempt and really attempts on President Trump. Lest we forget, there's actually a federal trial going on in Fort Pierce, Florida right now over the second assassination attempt, where he managed to have somebody who's a couple of months removed from President Trump having been shot that managed to get a gun through the fence on the golf course. And he was, the Secret Service folks who were paying attention at that point did a great job, but Trump was just one hole behind where he was lined up for a shot. So, that's going on even right now. There's no excuse for the Secret Service. And so that's just it. End of story. Not worth diving into. Cannot happen. Did happen. The failures have been discussed. When you take a look at the situation, Charlie Kirk, altogether different. Obviously, we're not talking about a Secret Service situation. He had his personal security detail, which is small. And then you had what we have learned, 6 local law enforcement officials that were kind of a mix of in uniform and plain clothes in the crowd. And I don't want to speak out of turn in any of this. What I can tell you is I know some elite private security folks live not far from Mar-a-Lago, and some of these elite teams I know. And I do not know Charlie's security team, but the people I know his team, and they are devastated because they failed. And nobody hurts worse than they do. I can't speak for why. One thing that I can say is that there are occasions, and there have been occasions, where security detail will tell people, hey, we can't guarantee your security. And they say, we're going in anyway. So again, I'm not going to speak out of turn in this situation, but that has been known to happen as well, as you're asking why and how can these things sometimes happen. Secret Service, never an excuse. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
When was the last time you bragged about your wireless company? Like, did you know my wireless company gave away 1,000 American flags to deserving vets and forgave $10 million in veteran debt? Did you know my wireless company raised almost $500,000 to help prevent veteran suicide? In other words, when your wireless company is Pure Talk, there's a whole lot to brag about. You can even brag about the coverage you get with Pure Talk, a 5G network that is insanely fast, dependable, and secure. And you can definitely brag about how much money you save with Pure Talk. Unlimited talk, text, plenty of data. Just $25 a month, saving the average family over $1,000 a year. It's time to switch to my favorite wireless company, Pure Talk. Go to puretalk.com/Levin and save an additional 50% off your first month. Again, puretalk.com/LEVIN. Make the switch today. Pure Talk, wireless worth bragging about.
When I saw the no votes, there were only 2 Caucasians. For the most part, the only people that voted no were people of color, because the rhetoric that Charlie Kirk continuously put out there was rhetoric that specifically targeted people of color.
Right. And so the House resolution, as she's condemning her fellow whitey white folk Democrats that voted for this thing, overwhelmingly the People's House did, said unequivocally the opposite of what she said. And that's what I think is really important, is be armed with the information. As you have people are saying and parroting nonsense like Jasmine Crockett, actually have the language from the House resolution at hand and go, actually, look at all these Democrats, not just the Republicans, but all these Democrats who said that he unified people, that he worked to bridge the political divide. All the things that have brought you in that House resolution, and then have them account for that. It's a really important part of the conversation. By the way, speaking of important part of the conversation, at the open, mentioned the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing. So the news was this afternoon, ABC, they are going to bring Jimmy Kimmel back. And my point was, are they? I mean, they can always do whatever they want to with him online, but that wasn't where the conversation started. The reason that Jimmy Kimmel got pulled wasn't because ABC and Disney finally grew a set. It was because the affiliate said, we ain't airing it. Not going to do it. So you had Nexstar, that was the first that pulled the plug, and you had Sinclair, that was the next that pulled the plug on Jimmy Kimmel, the largest owners of ABC affiliates across the country. And so what I mentioned at the open is they're going to be the tell here, because if they decide they're not going to air the show, then okay. Well, now Sinclair, first out, saying that they will preempt Jimmy Kimmel when he returns tomorrow. So no go on Sinclair, waiting for word on Nexstar. That'll be an interesting thing to watch. As Jimmy, maybe it'll just be straight online.
He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
The president said that we're looking into transgender violence. Does that mean the FBI is looking into it? And can you give any more clarity on how the administration is viewing this uptick in specifically transgender violence?
It's definitely something worth looking into, and I think anyone who denies that at this point is being willfully ignorant. And the administration is taking it seriously, all causes of violence, and why these people would be driven to such evil and such hatred.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the research being overwhelming on this. I've done a lot of research on it as we've had more and more tranny violence that's been occurring out there, and tranny-inspired violence and homosexual alphabet kind of stuff. And I'm going to dive into that here. I had mentioned that I might get around to the evil of gender ideology. We'll just go ahead and get to the evil of gender ideology, because it really is an extremely important part of the greater conversation here involving these types of things. And there's no doubt that there has been a massive escalation in violence. You really take a look back to what happened at that Christian church in Nashville in 2023 and the escalation of transgender-related and targeted violence, including the Annunciation Church in Minneapolis that happened just a couple weeks before the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Increasingly, we have seen transgendered-inspired violence. And so there is a lot of interesting information behind all of this. Hey there, Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin. Mark's back with you tomorrow. You'll be happy to know that. He'll be happy to be back with you. He has an awful lot that he'd like to share. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. I'm the host of the Brian Mudd Show, my home station, WJNO in West Palm Beach. You can catch me socially at Brian Mudd Radio, and you can catch the Brian Mudd Show podcast wherever you get your podcast. And so the evil of gender ideology, let's get into this a bit. First of all, and this is certainly something that Charlie Kirk would say, God doesn't make mistakes, right? God doesn't make mistakes. He's not like, I'm going to make this one a boy, but I really wanted to identify as a girl. Not what God's up to, right? See, you've only got two genders. There are two biological sexes. We got two genders. It's decided before birth. And those who continue to advance the homosexual alphabet in society, actually cancers in society. Cancers in society. And rather than dealing with the evident mental health issues that exist with those who pretend to be anything other than what they are, what do? Well, they lend credence to the entire situation, the condition that only creates worse outcomes. Because ultimately, what you're getting into, mental health territory. What happens if you have someone who has serious mental health issues and you basically just encourage the mental health issues, not dealing with them, not addressing them, but just encourage that path of thought? Anything good going to come out of that? Is that going to get better with time? So herein lies the problem in a nutshell. Society has moved to normalize something, transgenderism, that's amoral, that's unnatural, shouldn't be accepted. Shouldn't be accepted. I've run into a lot of people, they're on the right, and like, well, I've got gay friends, and you're missing the point here. There's a difference in someone who is homosexual and somebody who's accepting of the homosexual alphabet. Where you wake up in the morning, you're like, you know what? I'm feeling kind of froggy. Maybe I'll become an amphibian today. You're not one because you actually just said you identified as one. But somehow or another, if you wake up as a man, you go, I'm feeling kind of like a woman today. That doesn't make you a woman either, but there are people, including a Supreme Court justice, that doesn't want to tell you otherwise. That's not okay to encourage. That's a problem. That is a problem. And so there's a difference even between homosexuality and transgenderism. The reason that the homosexual alphabet is so dangerous is that it corrupted the entire thing. In fact, I've got conservative gay friends that resent the hell out of it, because unless you're down for the homosexual alphabet agenda, now you're an outcast. You're not one of them. And so they get pressure too. You're supposed to be on board. Where's your pride? All that kind of crap. So they created this entire thing to corrupt the entire conversation that way. And you're just playing into it if you accept transgenderism as anything other than amoral, unnatural, and something that should not be accepted. Nothing good comes out of it. So society has corrupted so much of this conversation, but also so much of the mental health industry. I mean, take a look at how many people in the mental health industry will just go, yeah, and medically go ahead and prescribe things. And then in some cases, you get into the further in the medical establishment and they'll exact physical outcomes and get the surgeons involved too. So then you take a look at do no harm. The Hippocratic Oath. How are you doing no harm when you're leaving severe mental health issues unaddressed and you're mutilating somebody, especially a child? Okay, so yeah, when somebody identifies as something other than what they are, not a red flag or a serious mental health issue at all, no. But as is always the case, if the premise of anything is false, anything built on that false premise is going to fail too. And this is but the latest example. So even still, within a corrupted mental health industry, according to the latest study done on this by the National Institutes of Health, you got 58% of transgender people that have at least one psychiatric diagnosis independent of the tranny thing. Even if they don't say that's a mental health thing, even then, 58% of the time somebody's transgender, they got something else that is actually being diagnosed. So a study published last October in the medical journal JAMA found really what is pointing to the problem that we're seeing in society. It's somewhat stunning, but not surprising given what we're seeing. The high levels of diagnosed issues with those who are transgendered. So the results included these. Among the transgendered community, 18% found to have been bipolar, 27% who abused controlled substances, 33% who've attempted suicide. And that's always the argument to go ahead and get it done, right? We're going to commit suicide. Right, because that's going to make it better. 53%, more than half now, with an anxiety disorder. 64% with diagnosed depression. That's your transgender community. What's been diagnosed, documented as recently as last October. Now, stunningly high numbers, but to really drive home the point, how about in comparison to your average, using their language, the cisgender? You know, you're just your average heterosexual guy. How much more likely is the average tranny to be jacked up than you? So the average transsexual person is 315% more likely to be a substance abuser. They are 401% more likely to suffer from chronic anxiety. They are 465% more likely to be clinically depressed. They are 555% more likely to be bipolar. Oh, and by the way, 1,086% more likely to attempt suicide. But other than that, I mean, going great. Yeah. That's supposed to be normal. That's what you're just supposed to go along with. And yeah, pride, homosexual alphabet thing. Yeah. Where's the flag? And not just the pride one, but the tranny flag too. Break that thing out. Yeah. So the homosexual alphabet movement's agenda, combined with political correctness caving to transgenderism, it's created this catastrophe for those who travel down this path. Nothing compassionate about this. There's nothing compassionate about anybody in the healthcare industry exacerbating those issues. That's abuse. These people are obviously not better off for being transgendered. My gosh. And so then you start taking a look at what's happening. Okay, so you have the targeting of innocent children at Christian schools. You have the assassination of Charlie Kirk by somebody who was obviously motivated with transgendered intent, as he had a relationship with a transitioning man. And then the messaging on bullet casings to that effect. When, as a society, we take God, we take natural law out of the equation, it's got to like make up our own rules. That's what happens. That's what happens. Nothing good. But the me to you on all this, polite society and political correctness have conditioned you to think that regardless of what it is that you believe, now you got to stay quiet. You got to go along with it. But no, because that's not the compassionate thing to do. Like, even if you have somebody, that is thinking about this thing or whatever, just wants to make it acceptable to those around them, that's not helpful in society. Do we want them to have all these mental health issues? But here's the next bigger problem. There was a huge irony associated with the last line of questioning that Charlie Kirk took. Do you know how many transgender Americans have been mass shooters over the last 10 years? There was a great deal of irony associated with that. And it plays into all of the mental health stuff I was just sharing with you, all the exacerbation of problems, and why this is likely starting to come to a head to a certain extent. And we're seeing a disproportionate amount of transgendered violence. I'll bring that to you next. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mudd Levin.
Recognizing a Palestinian state today is the only way to provide a political solution to a situation which has to stop.
The French President Emmanuel Macron. Just, oh my gosh, these people. And so, yes, we have a problem with some of our allies, including England, in addition to France. Hey, we got to do this two-state solution thing. I'm going to get to that here as well. I know Mark certainly would want me to. The farce of a two-state solution, it's just so beyond aggravating. But I do want to wrap up what I was talking about, this whole transgenderism thing. So the irony about that last line of questioning that Charlie was attempting to answer, the last line started with, do you know how many transgender Americans have been mass shooters over the last 10 years? The irony is this. We didn't have measurable levels of transgender people until within the past 10 years. I mean, yeah, preceding 2016, for example, you did have like a Caitlyn Jenner situation out there. There were isolated cases, and you started hearing, more of this like around 2015 in particular. You can find examples out there. You look around online, but it wasn't even like a medical category that would be studied and get into medical journals and all that. The first time you really see at scale numbers show up for transgendered medical outcomes is 2016. And in 2016, we see that there were 4,552 transgendered procedures that actually took place. People who went the distance in the transgenderism. By the way, most recently, with what the medical records show, that total is up to 125,500 people. Not just the people that have woken up and said, yeah, I'm feeling like a chick today. Let me go play some softball or run track against some women. Now, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about people that have gone the distance in this deal. We're still only talking about, in medical records, 125,500. Yet in a population of 342 million people, look at the outsized influence this agenda has taken. And the conversations, but then also the outsized violence. The murdering of the children at the Christian school in Nashville, Minneapolis, last month. Charlie Kirk, less than 2 weeks ago. So normalizing what is amoral, normalizing what goes against science, never ends well for society. Not going to be a good thing. So what we're experiencing, the early side effects of our society largely having done just that. It's the irony of the question is that this is a fairly new thing that we're experimenting with, basically. And with all of the mental health issues, all of the additional problems that I brought you, how they're more than trannies are more than 3 times as likely to be substance abusers, 4 times more likely to suffer from chronic anxiety, almost 5 times more likely to be clinically depressed, nearly 6 times more likely to be bipolar, and almost 11 times more likely to attempt suicide. We don't have a stat yet for how much more likely are they to commit violence against people, including shooting people. We don't. But you got to imagine somewhere in those numbers lies an answer, right? Not a good thing. Not a good thing. And so that is why it is particularly important that we stand up and, we take a stand against it. And so the irony about all of these things is that you're seeing it come together in Charlie Kirk's story. And it's an important one to be told. And so as the administration said that they're going to take a look at this, well, they very much should. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin. Oh, and I saw that I just jumped the gun there. So coming up, we're going to get to the farce of a 2-state solution. And so the French Emmanuel Macron, the situation with England, what really is going on there? What needs to happen? I'll break that down for you next. Take some of your calls, too. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
The voice of sanity in an insane world. The Mark Levin Show. Call in now at 877-381-3811.
We have seen a rise in violence perpetuated by Antifa radical people across this country who subscribe to this group. And unfortunately, it's gone widely uncovered by many in the legacy media. It also went completely ignored by the previous administration. Not anymore.
Yeah, that's another part of the problem. Specific about Kirk, in addition to the assassin having the transgendered connection, there also is the potential Antifa connection, as some other messaging on a bullet casing pointed to a song that dates back to World War II, an Italian theme that often has been used by Antifa at rallies. And so there is that whole dynamic as well. President promising to declare Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. By the way, this was something that he did actually promise to do during his first term as well, back during the George Floyd riots in 2020, but never actually ended up doing. I have a feeling he'll follow through this time, so stand by for news there. But a couple things for you. Mark, back with you tomorrow. And as we are taking a look at some of what's going on, wanted to get to the farce of a 2-state solution before the end of the show as well. So played the clip from Emmanuel Macron, French president, who is deeply embattled, but thinks that the only answer is that we have 2 states. We have Israel and we have Palestine. And you also have England that's jumping on the bandwagon and a lot of other weak-kneed liberals around the world. So the farce of this whole thing. Ignorance is a powerful thing. It's a weapon that is regularly leveraged over a certain large segment of the world's population. And you go back. So how did we get here? Well, in 1948, under terms that were agreed to with the United Nations General Assembly, you had the lands that comprise modern-day Israel and the current Palestinian territories designated to create an Arab territory and a Jewish state. So in May of 48, Israel officially recognized by the United Nations as a state. Now, the Palestinian territory is governed by 2 nearby Arab governments, Egypt and Jordan. And that continued until June of 1967, when Israel's influence expanded in the region, including holding influence over what then became known as the occupied Palestinian territories. And so you had the Israeli occupation in the disputed territories that continued until 93. And 93 is an important moment in time here, because this is when the Israeli military withdrew from much of the territory and recognized the PLO as an official government through the Oslo Accord. And so the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And at that point, the goal by many world leaders, including Israel's government at the time, a stated two-state solution. So if Israel is completely on board, if you had the Oslo Accord, why couldn't we get this done in 93? Well, because almost immediately, you had the PLO leader, Yasser Arafat, that supported terror operations. Now, imagine that. As soon as they saw a window, they started, hey, well, let's go take out the Jews, huh? So as a result, Palestine was not officially recognized as a state by the United Nations, and the region continued to be viewed through the prism of territories by the West. And what political movement ended up supplanting the terror-sponsoring PLO? Well, that, of course, became Hamas. When you had the Palestinian people in 2006 vote them in, you had over 75% of the people that voted in favor of Hamas, because apparently the PLO wasn't like terroristic enough. And so then you take a look and you fast forward, you go to October 7th. We had polling that showed you still had 3/4 of the people that would be under a Palestinian state on October 7th, supportive of Hamas. They're like, yeah, you know what? That was a pretty good thing to do. If you look at polling more recently, they don't support Hamas the way they used to because of how things have gone. Have these hearts and minds changed? You want to talk about the fallacy here. You had Hamas, which was founded on the eradication of the Jewish state. You have the people that were supportive. You have the less terroristic PLO preceding Hamas that was bent on eradication of Jews in Israel. So what exactly is it that you're working with here? I mean, at best, if you take a look at the statistically, I don't know, we got just under 1/4 of the people that might not try to kill Jews given the opportunity. We're going to create a populace of people and recognize that with, I don't know, 3/4 that, given the opportunity, would engage in terrorism. This is not a acceptable situation. There is no way you can have peace with people that, given the opportunity, and this has been shown historically, are only interested in killing you. I mean, there's more to it than that, but at its simplest form, there is that as well. All right, let's go to Fred. Fred in Kansas City. Fred, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I think the most important thing people are forgetting, and it's actually one of the complaints I have in conservative talk radio, why we're arguing, debating propaganda, which is exactly all that comes out of the left. I'm going to give an example for Jimmy Kimmel. It's an absolute slap in the face to all of us what ABC just released. And let's put it like this. Go back to Strzok and Page when the discussion was, what is an FBI agent? What is a detective supposed to do? They're not supposed to care about who they like, don't like, Republican, Democrat, et cetera, et cetera. So put everything aside. What's offensive with what Jimmy Kimmel did, because we now have 2, 3, 4 people that have assassinated people, attempted, et cetera, that have said their reasons were either in manifestos, on the shell casings, et cetera. They are parroting the propaganda exactly. So fascist, Nazi, I'll give you the easiest example. 15, 20 minutes after Roe versus Wade was reversed, the mainstream media came out, and this is their new scam where if they lose something with the Supreme Court, they're the far right, et cetera, et cetera. So 15, 20 minutes after that was done, the media came out big time and said that the Supreme Court's going to ban gay marriage. Now, abortions have nothing to do with gay marriage, so this is not something that can affect other things. So the point is this. It's not that what Jimmy Kimmel said was insensitive. He comes out after a guy was assassinated with the same name calling fascism and all this other stuff, and they come out and say the exact same thing, far right this, fascist. As you know, when he was banned temporarily here, the media jumped on the same thing here. Trump thinks he's a king. He wants to control who can be on the air. Oh,
yeah, Fred, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure what your concern is in terms of the effort to combat it. So, for example, you cut it off at the pass. So what I always try to do with things, I talk about there being two sides to stories and one side of facts. So if the premise of anything is false, anything built in that premise is going to be false too. It's the reason why I'm not interested in having any of these transgendered whatever. You're going to have problems. What I was just illustrating is that if you travel down the path of transgenderism, it won't end well. There's not going to be a right amount of hormones or, certain kinds of surgery. It's not going to go the whole thing. It's a false premise. If you want to talk in the case of Kimmel, he just outright lied. And I actually started the show with that. I mean, the great irony by the statement in ABC as they were saying that, hey, we're going to bring back Jimmy Kimmel Live on Tuesday. In a statement to Fox News, they ended up saying that it was a decision that they made because they feel some of the comments were ill-timed and thus insensitive. Ill-timed and thus insensitive. Not that, hey, he was demonstrably lying and slandering the situation, making when all the evidence had been out there that this was a radicalized leftist, that he was part of MAGA. So they're not, it was just the timing of it. And so, yes, then to your next point, though, about people who become radicalized, look, the bigger issue is you didn't have this guy who got radicalized by watching, mainstream media stuff. Obviously, it happened online. And that is what all the research shows. This is why so many of these groups are important. Discourse, that Tyler Robinson was involved in and everything else. And yes, just to kind of tie the two together. So the 4 bullet casings that were found. The first one said, hey, fascist catch. The next one, oh, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Ciao, Ciao. Now, that is the one that has an attachment to Antifa. I'll get to that here in a second. That is an Italian anti-fascist song. Translated, it means goodbye, beautiful. It originated in World War II. And most recently, like in any kind of pop culture thing, Netflix used it in the show Money Heist. The next bullet casing, if you read this, you are gay, LMAO. And then the spent bullet casing, the fourth one. Notices bulges, OWO, what's this, with arrow symbols. So that's an online reference commonly used in LGBT circles in reference to a man's crotch and furry role-playing. So on top of the rest of the related sickness associated with someone who would assassinate Charlie Kirk, they not only were in a relationship, this guy, with a transitioning man, but apparently they like to dress up as animals too. So nothing to see there in terms of the mental health issues. By the way, the arrows that happen to be on that bullet casing replicated those used in the online game Helldivers 2. So a couple things. You have the very obvious transsexual attachment there, the LGBTQIA plus apostrophe ampersand thing. And then you get into the Antifa piece that you also had Caroline Levitt asked about today. So if you take a look at that potential, and that is not established yet, but the O Bella Ciao has been adopted, widely used by Antifa as an anthem. They will often do that at their sponsored events, marches, protests, demonstrations, and also of significance. And this is something that really hasn't been discussed in all of this as well. Antifa members actually destroyed Turning Point USA's student setup at the University of California, Davis campus on May 3rd. So already earlier this year, Antifa actively destroying a Turning Point USA setup. So again, more evidence needed to fully kind of suss out, the connection. But it looks like you could have had the 1-2 punch of Antifa and the whole transgenderism. that was going on with this guy. And so, yeah, dealing with both of these problems, the issue is not embracing these arguments where they lie or embracing a false premise because the left presents us. It's dealing with the problems of the day. And the way that you deal with the problems is informationally and culturally change what's been happening here, which is exactly what Turning Point USA was about. It's exactly what Charlie Kirk was doing. And it's exactly what Turning Point USA is doing right now as the American Comeback Tour continues with Michael Knowles at the University of Minnesota campus. So that was kind of, tie the whole thing together with kind of like where we started today. This is what we are dealing with today. And the problems are only going to exacerbate the longer that we embrace a false premise. So that's why my message to you is to get yourself informed as to what Turning Point USA really is all about. The 4 different chapters that I ended up going through. Understand what the congressional resolutions were that passed and what even a majority of Democrats ended up voting for. It really kills the narrative, the false narrative of the Jasmine Crockett's and the AOCs of the world. Call people on it. He was honored as a unifier. None of the horrible things that the Crockett's, the AOCs, the leftists have been saying about the man. And then go out there and be a good influence yourself around others in your community. Bigotry is wrong. Bigotry is always wrong. But honesty and decency is always right. I'm Brian Mudd, in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
Celebrating or excusing violence is abhorrent. The murder of Charlie Kirk was not a political act. It was a gruesome crime.
Not a political act. These people, Jonathan Karl, everybody, ABC's own Jonathan Karl, the network that said not that Jimmy Kimmel's comments were slanderous, not that they were false, not that they were out of line, just that they were ill-timed. And so they're going to put Jimmy Kimmel back on. The question is, will it be on broadcast television tomorrow? Because we do have Sinclair Broadcasting, one of the 2 major ABC affiliate owners that has said, you know what? Not going to do it. We're going to preempt Kimmel tomorrow when ABC brings him back. So it'll be interesting. We still have not heard from Nexstar, the largest of the ABC affiliate owners, as to what they're going to do. This is where it all started. Nexstar and Sinclair were actually the ones last week that said, you know what? We're not going to air Jimmy Kimmel. And then ABC was like, okay, I guess we'll do something too. So now we're kind of going to reverse. Where ABC, Kimmel's back. Sinclair's saying, not so fast. So we shall see. By the way, some of the other news of the day, just real quick, as we're talking about mental health issues, transgenderism, all that stuff. The president, the administration announcing, hey, Tylenol. They believe it's linked to an increase in autism with pregnant women. President Trump specifically is like, Tylenol, bad. And acetaminophen, of course, is the drug, the active drug here. Tylenol is a brand. One of the things that is interesting in this, and I've not had a chance to get into the research, but if you can draw straight lines between the increase in medication that people are taking and autism rates. And so whether that is, what they're saying specifically, again, I haven't even had a chance to dive into it, but I'm sure people that are in the administration that know more than me are feeling pretty strong about this. But to give you an idea, if you go back to when autism was first being recorded, you go back to the 60s, 1 in 2,000 children diagnosed with autism. Then by the time you get to the 1980s, you have this spectrum that is beginning to be established. Now we're at 1 in 1,000. Then in 2000, you have the CDC, their first Autism and Development Disabilities Monitoring Report. Now we're up to 1 in 150. 2010, 1 in 68, 2021 in 36, and then in 2022, 1 in 31. So what's happening there? Does seem to be something to the story. It's not like that many more people are just being diagnosed. Hey, it's been a pleasure being with you. Mark, back tomorrow. Brian Mudd, pleasure being with you, and for Mark Levin.